My name's Chris Beaumont. I'm one of the partners at Clive Owners. I'm fairly sure I know a lot of you. And today, with Kevin Shotton, one of my fellow partners, who again a lot of you will know, we're going to do a quick run through on the Academy Trust Handbook. Apologies in advance if we don't call it Trust Handbook. Obviously, that's a new word for us, so we might well just refer to it as Handbook rather than try and get sort of the name right from time to time. As with in previous seminars, if you've got a question, if you can put it in the Q&A panel. If you've got any sort of technical questions, then please put it in the sort of the message or chat and send that to the host, and Ben, one of my colleagues, will actually sort of deal with that. Hopefully everybody's got the slides that were sent out about sort of 20 minutes ago. And to be honest, today's session is not going to be a long one. I've added a little bit more to it because I'm going to talk briefly about sort of changes to the sector. Before then, Kevin's going to talk about the Academy's Trust Handbook, and then I'm going to sort of pick up on a few accounting issues at the end. As I was saying, sort of the government tends to talk about sort of 10,000 plus, tends to talk about sort of 50% or more pupils being involved in academies, and it is pupils. I imagine there'll be some sort of fanfare made when we hit 10,000 academies out there, but that's probably a little way off yet. But as you'll all appreciate, there's about 22,000 schools in England. So in reality, sort of 44% of schools are academies. And of those, there's definitely a divide between secondaries and primaries. The secondaries were the first to sort of convert, and now we've got nearly 80% of secondaries converted. The numbers over the last few years of primaries have significantly increased. But that 79-37 split will differ from local authority areas because some are more proactive or more pro, I should say, academies. So if we sort of look then at sort of the direction of travel, we've now got sort of just short of 1,400 academies in standalone academy trusts. There are, though, another 8,000 academies now in another 1,200 multi-academy trusts. So an average now of sort of 7 schools. That's up from probably a couple of years ago. So it's a fairly significant sort of increase in that time. And as you can sort of see when you're looking at April 16 to sort of April 21, whilst the sort of the 2 to 5 school mat is still predominantly, there's more of them than any other, at sort of 60%. That number has significantly dropped over the last few years, and it's now those sort of larger types of mats, especially the sort of the 6 to 10s, 11 to 20s, which have been sort of increased in size over the last sort of few years. So what's happened with academies? I mentioned sort of the fact that there's 9,000, 9,600 there, 10,000 in due course potentially. Well, if you go back to 2017, there were over a sort of 1,000 conversions happening a year at that point in time. But we had the sort of the white paper came out. We've then had sort of Brexit, a word that seems to have been forgotten about in the last sort of 16, 18 months, given something else that's now overtaken us, which again has had an impact on conversions. We've also had sort of elections and election purges, and that's all slowed down the sort of the conversion process. So in 2020, there were actually less than sort of 400 schools that converted from the local authority into academy trusts, and it's going to be a sort of similar number this year, looking at what's actually come out at the moment. But there has been a sort of change in tact from the government, and there seems to have been a lot more sort of emphasis on these strong families, and that's a sort of comment that's been coming out in a number of speeches. I thought it's just worthwhile, just for sort of literally a few seconds, just picking up on Gavin Williamson's speech back in April. And those are sort of some quotes from his speech. Turn that 50% of pupils into 100%. The best family is an academy trust. That seems to me to be sort of indicating that academisation is coming back to the fore, and that is something that the government is looking to sort of push. Don't know, but that's definitely the sort of the impression I get. And then when you look at the sort of breakaway from our current pick and mix structure towards a single model, and no longer viable for schools to be single entities, if you take that sort of with the family theme which keeps coming through, it gives the impression, rightly or wrongly, that actually the government's not that in favour of sort of standalone academy trusts, but actually wants those multi-academy trusts to sort of develop and potentially therefore get some of the standalone academy trusts to actually move across into those multi-academy trusts. So How's it going to sort of achieve this? Is it going to be a carrot or stick? And I'm talking here about sort of schools from the local authority converting into academies, or even stats moving into maps. I mean, for schools conversion, RI, yeah, I think that's a given. But the word coasting schools seems to be coming back more to the fore now. So again, that's something that sort of there may be a bit more emphasis on there. Additional funding, I think it's unlikely we're going to return to the days of sort of 10 years ago, whereby additional funding was available for those that are converting, but possibility, very doubtful though, I think, on that. And then there's been a sort of move towards these sort of trust partnerships, try before you buy. But I'll be perfectly honest, we've seen very little of that happening. I've got literally a couple of instances that I'm aware of in the Northeast, and even speaking to some of our partners within the sort of Creston network nationally, they've not seen many instances of this at all. And one of the other things that sort of Kevin will pick up on is sort of this talk about sort of if your executive leaves and needing to sort of liaise with the RSC, is that going to be some way of actually sort of putting some pressure on you to actually sort of make some changes around your structure or something like that? So on that note, I'll pass across to Kevin to pick up on the Academy Trust Handbook.
Thanks, Chris, and morning, everyone. As Chris said, I'm planning on running through some of the key changes within the Trust Handbook. And as Chris has already mentioned, the first thing is on the front page that they've changed the name of the handbook itself. I think this year there is much more of a governance focus on the handbook, rather than changes in the kind of financial aspects, and because of that kind of scope creep on governance, maybe that's part of the reason why the word financial is dropped out of that. Just a reminder, obviously it is effective from 1st of September 2021, so it's for the upcoming year rather than things that need to have been done immediately. So going into some of the changes, and firstly looking at some of those that are more linked to governance. The first thing on there is around suitability of members. So obviously existing members or any members that are about to be appointed, one of the things just need to check is there's no restriction on those individuals to be linked with an educational establishment under Section 128 of the Educational Skills Act. So just a reminder that that's obviously something to check if you are appointing new members. Secondly, I think there's been a long-running debate in terms of whether trust boards should have places for parent trustees and what the correct number is. There are some MAT boards that don't have any parent representation on them. There's now a bit of guidance on here, and I guess the key word here is should. So obviously, as a reminder, throughout the handbook, there are various musts, which are things that absolutely have to be done, and there are quite a few shoulds. So shoulds really are their best practice. You need a very good reason why you aren't doing this, and if you are going down the route of not following a should, I think that's something that you'd want fairly robustly documented somewhere as to why that was the case. So in terms of looking at the places going forward, so for a standalone Academy Trust, there must be at least 2 places on the board. And for a MAT, either mirroring that or where local government bodies are in place, must be at least 2 places available on each local governing body. So obviously that gives a bit structure and things to think about. Obviously, articles also drive that, so you need to make sure that your articles are compliant with those requirements as well. And the last bit on this page is there's now a lot more in there highlighting the trust's obligations in respect of safeguarding, health and safety and estate management. And there's lots of signposts to other documents that are giving further guidance in those areas. again, I think the highlighting of this area probably links back to the changes in internal scrutiny that have come in over the last few years, where if you think about the feel of that internal scrutiny and what that section of the handbook's telling you to think about, it's a lot more beyond just financial areas, and it is trying to encompass some of these areas in there as well. So I think just highlighting trust obligations in those areas, hopefully, you know, it's a way of the ESFA just trying to hit home that is something that you do need to be thinking about when you're setting that internal scrutiny agenda. Over onto the following slide, and from the 1st of March 2022, any newly appointed senior executive leader will only be a trustee if certain requirements are met. So firstly, the articles permit it. Secondly, the members decide that they want to appoint them. And lastly, that the senior executive leader agrees. Now, obviously that's quite a change from where we've been in the past, where generally speaking, the accounting officer has traditionally been a trustee. But it does appear that there's now a strong preference from the department and from sort of the National Governors Association as well, that actually having that separation it is something that is favoured. Like I said, that's from the 1st of March 2022, and just thinking that through, it will obviously mean that you'll need to get members involved in any appointment decision as well, which might be slightly different, and obviously that process to be minuted as well. And in terms of governance reviews, again, trusts have quite often done these internally. There is a suggestion now that an external review would be more effective than self-evaluation. It's more rigorous to get that outside pair of eyes, looking at what's being done. And I think this again is linking to one of the areas that was highlighted in the accounts direction as something trusts can improve on. So if you think about your governance statement, there's an element of the governance statement where trusts are required to report on what's been done in terms of their review of the governance structure during the year. And that's one area in the accounts direction that was highlighted, that trusts don't always go into enough depth on that. So again, I think this change here is just reinforcing the importance of that. And then something that could be quite a significant change going forward, where there's an accounting officer planning to leave, there'll be a requirement to consult the RSC in terms of how you go ahead with that recruitment process. Like I say, that potentially is quite a significant change, and it'll be interesting to see where that's going to take us. Is this a way of the ESFA trying to move SATs along into maths? If they don't like the plans for recruitment, will they gently push any SATs into or smaller maths into bigger organisations? Be interesting to see what comes of that in due course. Then must appoint a governance professional to the board. That is something that was in that's included within last year's handbook. There's a change in the naming of the role, but in terms of responsibilities, that is exactly the same. It's really just there to guide and make sure that trusts have got someone guiding them across the correct regulations and requirements for how the board should be operating. And then DBS checks, again, more of a reminder on this one that there's as a requirement that you obviously have to obtain enhanced DBS checks for all staff and supply staff, and also for members, trustees and local governing body members as well on that side. We've gone back over there, Chris. Right. Moving on to some of the financial requirements. So on this scheme of delegation, so that now is a requirement to review that annually, or where there's a significant change in management or the trust structure. I think, particularly where there's a change in the trust structure, that is, it can be an area that's overlooked. It's obviously a very busy time in ensuring that things are still fit for purpose on that scheme of delegation. If a new school or a number of new schools were to come into the trust, is obviously important. And then disclosure of executive pay. Again, this was something that came into the handbook last year, and it was really mirroring what was in the accounts. There's a bit more guidance this year, and it's suggesting that what might be helpful is more of a tabular format on this. So you may split out salary, pension contributions, and any other taxable benefits. But this is all really around that full disclosure, public money, ensuring transparency, and trying to cut down on headlines that hit some of the papers when it's felt that things maybe aren't as transparent as they should be. I think one of the things that now is clear on that is that it must include the employer's pension contribution as well. And I think that's potentially why that tabular format may be preferable, because it, rather than one figure in there, if it's split out, it avoids any confusion as to why the sum may be or may appear significantly larger than the actual salary. And then in terms of records that must be made available for public inspection, agendas for all trustee and governing body minutes, approved minutes of those meetings, and reports that are considered at those meetings. Again, this is all linked to transparency, but clearly one of the things that you need to be comfortable with and need to check very carefully if you were required, if anyone did make a request to see this information, is that you're appropriately redacting the documents, or named individuals you'd want to cut out there. And also there may be some areas where there may be highly confidential information that it may be justified to leave out of those. Internal scrutiny. So like I alluded to earlier, there were a number of changes around internal scrutiny in last year and the year before. One of the requirements for certain trusts is to have a separate audit committee and finance committee. I think one of the key things going forward is that you can't have the same chair for both of those committees, so there should be separation at those two levels where you do have both committees in place. And then also the options that you can use for internal scrutiny. The key change here is that it now excludes a review by the senior leadership team. So it can't be done by that review, couldn't be done by the accounting officer, the CFO, or any other member of the senior leadership team. So you're looking at the other options that are in there of an external internal audit provider, some sort of peer review, or having your own dedicated in-house internal audit function, provided none of that function formed part of the senior leadership team. And then quite a significant change for some trusts, but something where other trusts have kind of worked to this all along, and obviously something that will impact on ourselves as auditors. There's now a requirement that you should retender the external audit every 5 years. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier about you'd need a very good reason not to do that. So I think that is going to become something whereby that almost becomes mandatory, that kind of 5-year review. You don't have to change auditors, you just need to be able to demonstrate that you've followed that process. We're also, there's an audits forum meeting next week where we expect there to be a bit more clarity put onto that as well, as to whether that is a 5-year period starting from the 1st of September 2021, or whether trusts that have already been with the current auditors for 5 years have to immediately go out to tender. Our understanding at the minute is that it will be phased, so there's not a 1st of September cut-off, but like I say, we're hoping more clarity will be given in the audits forum meeting, and we'll update from there for those trusts that it impacts on. And as a reminder as well, there's a number of points set out within the handbook of areas that you must be considering when evaluating tenders from auditors as well. So areas such as the experience of the auditor, the quality of recommendations and advice given by the auditor, and also the knowledge of the firm and the staff being some of those key areas that should be considered when making the appointment. And a change in delegated authorities. So this is linked to severance payments. So if you have a severance payment that goes above £100,000 that contains a non-statutory element, then you must get prior approval from the ESFA to make that payment, or any severance payment where the individual is on a package of more than 150,000. So regardless of whether there's a special element to that or not, would also need to get prior approval. And then in terms of intervention, so a couple of changes here. If on request, Academy trusts have to provide authority for a third party to release information in relation to financial management or governance. We think this is linked to some investigations which have proved troublesome for the ESFA, where it's probably fair to say that information hasn't been forthcoming to prove or disprove allegations that have been made. So it's giving the ESFA the ability to go direct to third parties to obtain that information. And then cybercrime, a much wider topic, and something that's impacting organisations, regardless of sector. We have seen instances where schools have unfortunately been closed due to cyber attacks, and I would imagine it forms a discussion at all trusts kind of audit and risk committees when discussing the risk register. Now there's now a requirement to obviously have an awareness and have proportionate controls. So considering what controls, safeguards, protections you would have in place as a trust. And also, if you are subject to a ransomware attack and a demand to release information, you have to obtain an ESFA approval before parting with any cash to release that. Hopefully to release the data. And the last thing on this page, again, probably linked to the title of the document and what I said earlier about there being much more of a governance feel about the handbook as well. Financial notices to improve are now called notices to improve. Now, hopefully that's just a name change, and it's doesn't give the ESFA the ability to widen the scope of what could be covered by one of these notices to improve. But again, it's something that I think we'll only find out in the fullness of time as to whether it is just a name change or another angle for potentially trying to accelerate smaller MATs and SATs into larger trusts. Yeah. I think on that I'll pass back across to Chris to run through across some accounting issues.
Thanks, Kevin. There's been a number of changes there, none of them sort of massive, but I think the one that comes through is obviously the sort of change of focus from sort of the finance to the sort of governance and the wider perspective there, and also whether there's sort of one or two tinkerings at the edges which might might be used by the ESFA in due course to get an outcome that they prefer. But hopefully that's not the case, and that's just us sort of reading into something we shouldn't be reading into it. I'm just briefly going to touch on a couple of accounting issues. Obviously, we've had the pandemic over the last 16, 17 months. There's been various national government and local government income provided to support for academy trusts. And whilst we're waiting on the supplementary bulletin to be released, the expectation we have from some of the discussions we've had with the SFA by the Auditors Forum meetings is that there'll be some additional requirement for some breakdown of that income within the financial statements, or if not the financial statements, then the AAR in due course. So just a sort of heads up on that. Then in respect of the conditional fund bids, I mean, you obviously got an additional month to submit your bid. The SFA then took an extra couple of months for them to review the bids. So we've only got really data on who's actually been successful in the last week or so. Where you're still planning for that project to go ahead, and I appreciate in a lot of cases now this might not be this summer, given the timescale that you've actually got to work to, we'll still need to accrue for those within the 21 accounts. So just if you have been hopefully successful in those, then just a reminder basically to bring those monies into the year-end accounts. And then we've had one or two people saying, well, there's certain grants, such as a PE grant, we've not been able to spend during the year, and therefore do we defer some of that? And the answer is no. It's actually what's classified as restricted monies, and therefore what we have in the year-end accounts is a restricted fund. So you just carry it forward, but whereas on the really one of the last notes in your accounts, you've got the unrestricted, then you've got the restricted monies which are broken down between your GAG, your pupil premium, and so on. One of those other funds within that list will be your PE grant if you've not spent it all at the year end. And then probably the biggest piece of work that you'll probably need to do is around the computers that have been donated, whether that's national government, local authority, local entrepreneurs, other interested individuals. We're aware, well, the government's told us that there's been something in the region of 1 million computers distributed to schools across the UK. So it's obviously a fairly significant number. What you need to do as a trust is look at whether you actually own these in your own right, and therefore you're letting the pupils take them home on an evening, but there's an expectation at the end of the year that you'll get those computers back, or whether you've acted as an agency. And I'm aware that in a few cases what's actually happened is that the schools actually worked with, say, the local authority to provide those with details of who they need to give them the computers to, but at the end the computers are those pupils' individuals' computers, not ones for the trust. And in that case you're acting as an agent. The difference between the two is if you own, then it'll be a sort of restricted fixed asset coming in as a donation, and it'll be going onto your balance sheet. If you've acted more as an agency capacity, then what we need to know is the number that's going to go in the back end of the accounts. There's a note at the end which talks about the agency income and expenditure that you've had, and we'd have to include it in there. The valuation of these computers, we were hopeful the SFA were actually going to publish a list of what they'd actually paid for the computers, because that would have been nice and easy to pass on to yourselves, so that you could have then used those numbers to have actually calculated the donation or the agency cost. But at the last minute, after some sort of third-party intervention, it's been decided not to release that. So unfortunately, you have to come up with your own value as to what the individual computers are. At the moment, I'm typically hearing sort of 300, 350, something of that sort of region being sort of talked about as probably the number which will be used by lots of schools. And then just a reminder, you'll need your FRS 102 LGPS valuation for the 31st of August. I'm aware now that one or two of the local authorities are starting to come out and ask the usual sort of questions. So if I could remind you all to complete those and get those in, and then obviously that, the quicker you get that in, probably the quicker the queue you are, and therefore the quicker you'll get the valuation at the end. And then if you've had any schools join during the last year, then you'll need sort of obviously that land and buildings valuation, so we can bring that into the accounts as an appropriate value. And then a couple of other things on there, directors, trustees reports. Given the sort of situation we have with exam results, I use quotation marks there, I can't see there any reason to sort of delay writing these. So if you could put a bit of pressure on your accounting officers to actually write these, or if the accounting officer then delegates it back to yourself, if you could then sort of get on with sort of writing those sooner rather than later, that'd be appreciated. One of the reasons I say this is because it would be nice if you could actually put that trustees report in front of your trustees directors to get their agreement before it comes across to ourselves. Because what Kevin and I tend to find in a number of meetings as we go along to is it's little bits in the English in the trustees report that are getting questioned about, well, shouldn't we have capitals on that or an apostrophe on that? And it takes away from the discussion around the sort of the financials, which is really what we're there to discuss. So if we could get the trustees to actually agree that piece up front, the trustees report, then obviously they shouldn't be coming back and asking questions in due course or making amendments in that final meeting. And then the wish lists have been sent out in the last sort of 24 hours, so hopefully you've all received those. If you've got any questions, then obviously please come back to us, and we'll sort of help you with understanding why we're asking certain questions within there. It's very similar, to be honest, to last year's wish list. And then lastly on that page is just the rates claims, and just a reminder that the ESFA have been going through a consultation whereby they're looking to pay the local authority directly for the rates from April 22. Still a sort of consultation, so it hasn't been finalised as yet. But if it is, and it's highly likely it will be, then if you've got an historic claim that you need to make to the SFA for that rates relief, you've only got until March 22 to do it. After that, you will not be able to make a claim. So it's probably worthwhile, given the value of those rates claims, just going back over and just making sure that you've actually claimed everything that you should have done, just so there's sort of, as I say, you don't miss the deadline and suddenly find you can't make a claim. And that's it. So unfortunately, I can't see the question board. I think Kevin can see the question board, so I don't know if we've got any questions or not that have come through.
I can't see any in there at the minute. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. If we'll just give it a couple of minutes, just see if anyone types anything into the Q&A. I
think we've summed them, everything we've said.
Yeah, I mean, if there's nothing. I think we do have a question now, Chris. So, can a member be a member? Can a member be a member of the audit committee? That's the question.
I'll be perfectly honest, off the top of my head, I'd have to go and double check on that one. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what the answer is to that one, Kevin, unless you can recall.
No, I mean, my gut, again, it'd be worth checking. My gut feel is that they're pushing for separation between trustees and members. So my gut feel is they may be able to attend as an observer, but maybe part of the formal committee. But that's something we can go away and check on that one. And then there's another question coming through in relation to separate chairs for finance and audit. Is it required over 50 million overall? I think my understanding of that is that if you've where you have the two separate committees, regardless of the size, it would need to be a separate chair.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
Just another question here as well. Any examples of who is likely to request sight of agendas or approved minutes of meetings?
You may well get one or two disgruntled parents, I suppose, asking for them. I've come across instances whereby one or two parents have been very challenging if they haven't thought that their child's been appropriately sort of looked after. Then they've asked for a sight of a lot of documentation and made life a little bit more difficult, shall we say, for the trust. Other than that, I mean, obviously you've got FOI applies to yourself, so freedom of information requests apply to yourself. So you could be the press, if they've got a particular interest in certain things, actually are requesting that information. If they want to sort of write an article about the school, they may want to obtain a bit more information from having a look through those documentation.
I think, yeah, I think it looks like they're all the questions that are coming through. But obviously, as always, if something comes to mind subsequently, then feel free to give myself or Chris a call. We'll be happy to ask any general questions, or obviously questions that are specific to your trust.
Right. On that note, I think we're finalised, and I think thank you very much for listening to us today. And as Kevin says, if you've got any queries, then please get in touch.